My dad had been a high school assistant principal for years, and I'd heard countless stories about his work. But nothing prepared me for what happened during his first year at his new school. The contrast between his old and new positions was striking. His previous school had been overcrowded, plagued with drug problems, and most students qualified for free or reduced lunches. Fights erupted almost weekly, and my dad found himself suspending students nearly every day. It was exhausting work that drained him emotionally and physically. When he got the opportunity to transfer to a better school in a nicer district, he jumped at it. The new school was everything he'd hoped for. Well-funded, academically focused, with engaged parents and motivated students. In his entire first year, there were only 2 significant incidents. One involved an autistic student who had an episode, which was handled with compassion and understanding. The other incident, however, became legendary. It involved an entitled family who made the catastrophic mistake of underestimating my father's dedication to protecting his staff and students. The whole situation began approximately 2 months ago with what seemed like a minor conflict. I'm not entirely sure what triggered the initial confrontation, but from what my dad pieced together from various accounts, it was one of 2 possibilities. Either the bus driver accidentally bumped into an entitled girl while dropping her off at her stop, or he had reprimanded her for saying something rude to other students. The girl, who was a junior at the school, didn't take well to being corrected. She was apparently used to getting her way and having adults back down when she threw tantrums. Instead of accepting responsibility or moving on, she immediately pulled out her phone and texted her mother. She painted herself as a victim, claiming the bus driver had been aggressive and inappropriate toward her. Her entitled mother, believing every word without question, came storming out of their house and began yelling at the bus driver right there in the driveway. The bus driver, a patient man in his 50s who'd been doing this job for over a decade, tried to explain what had actually happened. But the entitled mother wasn't interested in hearing his side. She screamed at him, hurled accusations, and made wild threats. The bus driver quickly realized this situation wasn't going to be resolved through conversation. With other students still on the bus watching this confrontation unfold, he made the professional decision to simply drive away. He wasn't going to engage in a screaming match with an irate parent while responsible for the safety of 30 other children. As he pulled away from the property, he assumed that would be the end of it. Maybe the mother would file a complaint with the school, which would be investigated and dismissed. He dealt with difficult parents before. But what happened the next morning proved that this entitled mother was operating on an entirely different level of crazy. The following morning, the bus driver followed his usual route. When he arrived at the entitled girl's stop, he pulled into the driveway as he always did. But something was immediately wrong. The entitled girl wasn't standing there waiting to board like she normally would be. Instead, he saw 3 adults standing at the end of the driveway. The entitled mother was there, along with 2 people he didn't recognize. He opened the bus door to ask where the entitled girl was, assuming she was sick or had already gotten a ride to school. That's when all 3 adults suddenly rushed onto the bus. The bus driver was shocked. The entitled girl's older brother, who was around 22 years old, boarded first. Right behind him came her older sister, who was home from college, and the entitled mother brought up the rear. These weren't teenagers throwing tantrums. These were full-grown adults who had just illegally boarded a school bus full of terrified children. What happened next was absolutely terrifying for everyone on that bus. All 3 members of the entitled family immediately started screaming at the bus driver. They weren't just yelling, they were threatening him. The entitled mother got right in his face, jabbing her finger at him while calling him every name imaginable. The entitled brother was even more aggressive, using racial slurs and threatening physical violence. The entitled sister joined in, creating a cacophony of abuse while 30 students sat frozen in their seats. Some of the younger kids started crying. The older students pulled out their phones, unsure whether to call 911 or record what was happening. The bus driver sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to remain calm while these 3 adults berated and threatened him. He knew that any reaction from him could escalate the situation or be twisted against him later. So he stayed silent, enduring their abuse, waiting for an opportunity to get them off his bus so he could protect the children in his care. The tirade seemed to go on forever, though it probably only lasted a few minutes. The entitled mother demanded the bus driver be fired immediately. The entitled brother threatened to beat his ass if he ever spoke to their sister again. The entitled sister recorded portions of the encounter on her phone, probably planning to edit it and post it on social media to paint the bus driver as the aggressor. Throughout this nightmare, the bus driver kept his composure. He didn't argue back. He didn't try to defend himself. He just waited. Finally, seemingly satisfied that they'd sufficiently intimidated him, all three adults got off the bus. The moment their feet hit the pavement, the bus driver closed the door and drove away as fast as safety allowed. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing. But his first priority was getting these traumatized kids to school safely. As he drove, he knew he had to report this immediately. The entitled family had made one critical miscalculation in their little ambush. They'd forgotten, or perhaps never knew, that every single school bus in our county is equipped with 4 high-definition cameras. These cameras have audio sensors and record everything that happens on the bus, from every angle. Every slur they'd shouted, every threat they'd made, every moment of their illegal boarding and harassment had been captured in crystal-clear video and audio. The evidence was irrefutable and damning. When the bus driver finally got all the other students to school safely, he drove straight to the front office. His hands were still trembling as he walked in and asked to speak with the principal and assistant principal immediately. My dad could tell something serious had happened just from the bus driver's demeanor. This was a calm, experienced professional who'd handled difficult situations before, and he looked genuinely shaken. They took him into a private office to hear what happened. As the bus driver recounted the morning's events, my dad felt his anger building. This wasn't just a case of a parent overstepping boundaries. This was adults endangering children, terrorizing a school employee, and thinking they could get away with it through intimidation. My dad asked the bus driver to wait while he immediately pulled up the video feed from the bus. The school's transportation office could access the footage remotely. Within minutes, my dad was watching the entire confrontation unfold on his computer screen. The video was even worse than the bus driver's description. You could see the fear on the children's faces. You could hear every vile word the entitled family members screamed. You could see the bus driver's restraint as he sat there taking abuse, protecting the students by not engaging. My dad made copies of the footage immediately. Then he picked up his phone and called the school resource officer. The school cop arrived within minutes, and my dad showed him the footage. The cop's face hardened as he watched. He dealt with difficult parents before, but this was beyond the pale. This was a clear-cut case of multiple crimes being committed on video. He immediately called for backup and started documenting everything for his report. My dad's principal came in to see what was happening, and after watching the footage himself, he told my dad something that would prove crucial. He said my dad could have complete control over handling this situation. The principal knew my dad's reputation. He knew that when it came to protecting staff and students, my dad did not mess around. He would handle this by the book, but he would handle it thoroughly. My dad nodded, already formulating his plan. This entitled family thought they could terrorize a school employee and traumatize children without consequences. They were about to learn otherwise. My dad's first priority was the bus driver's well-being and safety. He made arrangements for another driver to cover the route for the rest of the day. Then he started building his case. He worked with the school cop to gather statements from every single student who'd been on the bus that morning. Some of the younger kids were still upset, so my dad made sure counselors were available to talk with them. The older students were eager to give statements, outraged at what they'd witnessed. My dad documented everything meticulously: the video footage, the student statements, the bus driver's report, and the timeline of events. Within hours, he had an airtight case. The school cop coordinated with other officers, and by that afternoon, they went to the entitled mother's house. When she answered the door, probably expecting to file her own false complaint against the bus driver, she was arrested instead. The charges were serious: malicious harassment, intimidation, trespassing, and several others. The entitled mother was absolutely shocked. She actually had the audacity to act offended that she was being arrested. She demanded to know what charges she was facing and insisted this was all a huge mistake. The officers calmly read her rights and explained the charges. She tried to argue, claiming she was just protecting her daughter. The officers weren't interested in her excuses. She was handcuffed and taken to the county jail for booking. My dad felt a grim satisfaction knowing the entitled mother was learning that actions have consequences. But he wasn't done yet. He worked with the school's legal team and the district's lawyer to determine the best course of action. They decided to press criminal charges against both the entitled mother and the entitled brother. The entitled sister would face consequences too, but they focused on the two who'd been most aggressive and threatening in the video footage. The entitled brother's involvement was particularly interesting because, as my dad discovered through the police investigation, he was currently in the middle of a 6-month probationary period for an entirely different crime. This revelation changed everything regarding the entitled brother's potential punishment. Violating probation in such a spectacular fashion, by committing multiple new crimes that were captured on video, virtually guaranteed he would face significant jail time. My dad and the lawyers built their case carefully. They wanted justice not just for the bus driver, but for all the children who'd been terrorized that morning. In the meantime, my dad implemented several immediate measures at school. First, he had the entitled girl switch to a completely different bus route. She would no longer have any contact with the bus driver she and her family had targeted. This protected the bus driver from any potential retaliation or further harassment. Second, he issued formal bans prohibiting the entitled mother, entitled brother, and entitled sister from setting foot on school property. These bans were permanent and enforceable by law. If any of them violated the ban, they would face immediate arrest for trespassing. Then my dad did something that really demonstrated his commitment to supporting his staff. He arranged for the bus driver to receive a full month of paid time off. The poor man had been through a traumatic experience, and my dad wanted him to have time to recover without worrying about finances. The bus driver was incredibly grateful. He'd worked in education for years and had never had an administrator go to bat for him like this. Most administrators, he told my dad, would have worried more about public relations or avoiding conflict with parents. My dad told him that protecting staff and students was his job, and he took that job seriously. While the bus driver took his well-deserved time off, my dad continued building the case with the lawyers. They gathered all the student statements into affidavits. They compiled the video evidence with timestamps and annotations. They documented the trauma impact on the students, with several parents writing letters about how their children had nightmares after witnessing the incident. The entitled mother posted bail after spending 2 nights in jail. She immediately tried to spin a narrative on social media about being victimized by the school system. She claimed the bus driver had assaulted her daughter and that she was only trying to protect her child. She conveniently left out every detail about boarding the bus illegally, making threats, and traumatizing 30 other children. Some people who didn't know the full story even sympathized with her at first, but my dad's school district had a policy of not commenting on ongoing legal matters, so they couldn't publicly refute her lies. Instead, they let the legal system handle it. The entitled mother hired a lawyer, though from what my dad heard, even her own attorney seemed unenthusiastic about the case once he reviewed the evidence. The entitled brother also got a lawyer, though whether his was court-appointed or privately hired, my dad never found out. As the trial date approached, my dad prepared to testify if needed. 6 weeks after the incident, the trial date finally arrived. My dad, his principal, and the school cop all went to the courthouse. They were prepared to serve as witnesses if called, though they hoped the video evidence would be sufficient. The prosecution's lawyer, representing both the bus driver and the school system, was confident but not cocky. He knew they had an overwhelming case, but you never know what might happen in court. The entitled mother's lawyer seemed resigned to losing. His entire strategy appeared to be focused on minimizing her sentence rather than proving her innocence. As everyone took their seats in the courtroom, my dad noticed the entitled mother looked defiant, not remorseful. She still seemed to believe she'd been justified in her actions. The entitled brother was scheduled for a back-to-back trial immediately after his mother's. His case would be heard by the same judge on the same day, which made logistical sense given they'd committed the same crimes together. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecution laid out the case clearly and methodically. They explained what had happened, the laws that were broken, and the impact on the victims. The entitled mother's lawyer made a brief opening statement that essentially argued his client had been trying to protect her daughter and had overreacted in the heat of the moment. It was a weak defense, and everyone in the courtroom seemed to know it. Then came the evidence presentation. The prosecution called the bus driver to testify. He described the incident calmly and factually, explaining how frightened he'd been for the students in his care. His testimony was powerful and credible. Then the prosecution introduced the video evidence. Interestingly, the judge ended up not needing to view the videos during the trial because there was so much other corroborating evidence, and because the defense wasn't disputing what had happened, only arguing about the appropriate punishment. Several students who'd been on the bus also gave testimony. A 16-year-old girl described how she'd been so scared she'd called her mother from the bus, sobbing. A 14-year-old boy talked about having nightmares for weeks afterward. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of the trauma the entitled family had inflicted on innocent children. The entitled mother's lawyer did his best during cross-examination, but there wasn't much he could do. The facts were the facts. His client had illegally boarded a school bus, threatened a school employee, and terrified children. No amount of legal maneuvering could change that reality. After all the testimony concluded, both lawyers made their closing arguments. The prosecution asked for a sentence that would send a clear message that this behavior was unacceptable and illegal. The defense asked for leniency, suggesting community service and probation rather than jail time. Then everyone waited for the judge to decide. The judge took his time reviewing his notes before speaking. When he finally addressed the courtroom, his tone was serious and firm. He looked directly at the entitled mother and began explaining his decision. He said he'd carefully considered all the evidence and testimony. He acknowledged that parents naturally want to protect their children. However, he continued, there were legal and appropriate ways to address concerns about school staff, and what the entitled mother had done was neither legal nor appropriate. She had threatened the life of a man who was simply doing his job. She had endangered children who had nothing to do with her grievance. She had trespassed on school property, the bus being an extension of school property. And she had done all of this not because of any real wrongdoing, but because the bus driver had appropriately corrected her daughter's behavior. The judge's words were measured but damning. My dad felt a sense of vindication watching the entitled mother's face as she realized the judge wasn't buying her victim narrative. Then came the sentence. The judge sentenced the entitled mother to 30 days in jail. You could hear gasps throughout the courtroom. Nobody had expected such a substantial sentence. The prosecution had hoped for maybe a week, possibly less. The entitled mother's face went pale, then red. She started to protest, but her lawyer quickly silenced her. The judge continued, making it very clear that he wanted his reasoning on the record. He said the entitled mother needed to understand the severity of what she'd done. He emphasized that threatening someone and traumatizing children were serious crimes that warranted serious consequences. He said he hoped the sentence would give her time to reflect on her actions and make better choices in the future. The entitled mother was led out of the courtroom, and my dad and his principal had to suppress the urge to cheer. They maintained their professional composure, but my dad told me later he'd wanted to pump his fist in the air. Justice had been served. But the day wasn't over yet. The court took a brief recess before the entitled brother's trial was scheduled to begin. Everyone expected him to appear for his trial, since it was immediately following his mother's, and they'd presumably arrived at the courthouse together that morning. But as the courtroom refilled and the judge returned to the bench, one person was notably absent. The entitled brother was nowhere to be seen. His lawyer was there, looking confused and concerned. The bailiff called the entitled brother's name 3 times. Silence. The judge looked displeased. He asked the entitled brother's lawyer if he knew where his client was. The lawyer stammered that he'd seen him that morning before his mother's trial and assumed he'd return after the recess. The judge's expression darkened. He announced that the entitled brother had apparently decided to skip his own trial. The implications of this decision were immediately obvious to everyone in the courtroom who understood the legal system. This was catastrophically stupid. The judge didn't waste time. He immediately issued a bench warrant for the entitled brother's arrest. His tone made it clear that he viewed this no-show as a sign of contempt for the court and a lack of remorse for the crimes committed. The entitled brother was already facing serious charges related to the bus incident. But now he'd added failure to appear to his list of offenses. And given that he was currently on probation for a different crime, this was a probation violation. My dad learned later that there was absolutely no way the entitled brother could have forgotten about his trial. It was scheduled back-to-back with his mother's trial, on the same day, in the same courtroom. He'd been present in the courthouse that very morning. The only logical explanation was that he'd heard his mother's sentence, panicked, and fled. If he thought running would help him, he was about to learn otherwise. The wheels of justice were now turning against him even faster than before. Dad left the courthouse feeling satisfied about the entitled mother's sentence, but curious about what would happen with the brother. My dad didn't have to wonder for long. The very next day, he got a call from the school cop with an update. The police had located and arrested the entitled brother at his mother's house, the same house where this entire situation had originated. Apparently, he'd gone home after fleeing the courthouse, somehow thinking that was a good hiding place. The police arrested him without incident, and he was brought before the same judge who'd issued the warrant. This time, there was no trial, no opportunity for testimony or defense. The entitled brother had forfeited those rights when he'd skipped his court date. The judge was not pleased. He'd already been prepared to sentence the entitled brother harshly based on the bus incident and the probation violation. But skipping the trial added another layer of consequences. The judge made his displeasure abundantly clear before announcing the sentence. He noted that the entitled brother had shown a pattern of disregard for the law and the legal system. First, the original crime that put him on probation, then the bus incident, then skipping his trial. The sentence the judge handed down was stunning: 1 full year in prison. My dad heard about it from the school cop who'd attended the sentencing hearing. The entitled brother was given a year for breaking his probation, for skipping his trial, and for the same charges his mother had faced: harassment, intimidation, trespassing, and making threats. All of those violations combined resulted in 12 months behind bars. The entitled brother apparently tried to apologize to the judge and claim he'd been scared and made a mistake. The judge was unmoved. He said that adults must face the consequences of their choices, and the entitled brother had made numerous bad choices in a row. As my dad relayed this information to me that evening, I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. This was exactly the kind of outcome he'd been hoping for. The entitled family had thought they could terrorize a school employee and traumatize children without facing real consequences. Instead, they'd learned that the legal system takes these matters seriously. The aftermath of the trials rippled through the school community. The bus driver, who'd been on his paid leave during the trials, returned to work feeling vindicated and supported. The students who'd been on the bus that terrible morning felt safer knowing the adults who'd scared them were facing real punishment. Parents in the district heard about how my dad and the administration had handled the situation, and my dad received numerous emails thanking him for protecting the students and staff. The story spread through the educational community in our county. and my dad's reputation as someone who didn't tolerate threats against his people was reinforced. As for the entitled girl, the catalyst for this entire disaster, she ended up switching schools. Whether her family moved or she transferred on her own, my dad never found out. But she was no longer his problem. The entitled mother would spend a month reflecting on her choices in jail. The entitled brother would spend a year doing the same in prison. Looking back on the entire situation, I was incredibly proud of my dad. He could have handled the incident in so many different ways. He could have tried to smooth things over to avoid conflict. He could have asked the bus driver to just accept an apology and move on. He could have worried more about the school's public image than about justice. Instead, he chose to do what was right. He protected a staff member who'd been terrorized. He ensured the students who'd been traumatized received support. He worked with law enforcement and lawyers to hold the perpetrators accountable. And he sent a clear message to every parent in the district that threatening school employees and endangering children would result in serious consequences. If that wasn't pro-revenge, I didn't know what was. It wasn't petty or vindictive. It was justice served through proper channels, resulting in outcomes that far exceeded what anyone expected. The entitled family thought they could intimidate and threaten without repercussions. Instead, they learned that some people, like my dad, actually follow through. And sometimes, the system works exactly as it should.